Okay, welcome to the final session for Earth Changes 2000, and we now will have our panel discussion, and the audience is free to ask questions, providing you do so within the constraints that we set up. Mainly is we have a microphone for the purpose. If you wish to ask a question, you may form a line or a cue from the microphone. Make sure you have the microphone before you speak. You can address your question to any speaker you choose or to the group as a whole. It's up to you. Try to be brief, and we ask for questions only. We just don't have the time or to deal with lengthy comments. I realize many of you may have a lot you might like to say on the subject, but please, we just don't have the time. So I'll be here if anything requires my attention. Otherwise, I'm just going to get out of the way. And I think we have someone already in place, so we'll begin.
Good afternoon. I'll just, to anybody in the panel, my name is Michael East. I'm from Aspen, Colorado. I have 6 questions, but I'll limit it to 2. And for the sake of the conference, these questions were not answered, so I'll see if we can get some answer on it. First, is there any known reason for the existence of the temple at the Sphinx? Not the Sphinx itself, but the temple of the Sphinx. And number 2, do we know what the purpose was for Egypt being laid out like the heavens, with all the structures in the river and the whole thing?
I could give a really quick geological answer for the Sphinx, the temple in front of the Sphinx.
Yeah, what was its purpose? I mean, it was taken apart from the original Sphinx.
I was going to say, and I don't mean to be totally facetious, because it could sound that way. Now let Wes take over if he wants to comment on it. But they had to carve out the blocks,
Right.
and they had all these blocks sitting around. They had to do something with them. And I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, I think in a sense they used those blocks to build something, and they happened to build a couple of temples. I don't know what the function of those temples were, but sort of mechanically or structurally or whatever, I mean, to me it made sense that they were essentially being efficient and that they had this material and then they were using it for something else.
So we don't
So
know.
that's a very practical aspect, and then I'll let him maybe speculate if he wants to.
Actually, it's a very good question. Obviously, the Egyptians didn't go hurling around 200-ton blocks for the hell of it. They had some
Right,
good reason
exactly.
for
Right.
putting those
Exactly.
temples there. Now, the Valley Temple, the one that has the granite facing on it, is called the Mortuary Temple of Khafra. Well, nobody really knows it's a mortuary temple. Supposedly, that's where the body was prepared for burial in the pyramid. But since there was no burial in the pyramid, and in fact, none of the Giza pyramids have been demonstrated to have been tombs at all. It's a thorny question that I won't get into, but this is the name applied to it by the Egyptologists. So insofar as anybody knows what that temple was supposed to do, it's supposed to have been a mortuary temple. That means nothing as far as I'm concerned. The temple in front of the Sphinx, called the Sphinx Temple, is a mystery to everyone, and it's a particularly good question actually, because one of the questions I have when you're there, if you noticed from the chopper, the high shots, you see the temple, you see the ruined Sphinx temple in front of the Sphinx. Actually, when the temple was complete and probably roofed over, at least parts of it were roofed over, it would effectively block out the Sphinx from the front view. In particular, if you remember that in front of the Sphinx, there's a kind of a slope. The Sphinx is really built on a hill.
Right.
So how on earth, the purpose is even a better question than you think, because the temples actually obscure the view of the Sphinx, which seems a very strange thing to do, to go to all that trouble to
Right.
build the Sphinx
And
then not be able to see it.
And if it was roofed over, of course, if you're inside the Sphinx Temple, you wouldn't see it. Also, you walk into the Sphinx Temple, the back wall, the western wall of the Sphinx Temple, there's no way to go from there into the Sphinx enclosure to see the Sphinx.
One only possibility, maybe, is that if parts of that temple were roofed over, it's hard to imagine that it was all roofed over because there are such large expanses that would have had to have been spanned. But if there were parts of it that were roofed over, maybe it was on the roofed over sections
Right.
that maybe that's how you were supposed to view it, you know, the priesthood or whatever, or the ceremonies would be carried out there, but this is pure speculation and conjecture on our part, so.
I was going to mention